very well. There is augmentation of domestic capability when it comes to steel and iron. Also, we observed that imports decline in mineral fuels, and that aircrafts, spacecrafts and their parts replace fertilizer in top 10 import products. Mostly this mineral fuels and also fertilizers, both the products have gone down. It's because of what we call disturbances in the West Asia and basically the Strait of Hormuz, which has reduced these two commodities. Directionally, more or less, they remain the same, except the Hong Kong, where India's exports to Hong Kong has gone up year on year by 54%, and that has entered, Hong Kong has entered as one of the top export destinations. And we see some good points here. Our dependency on North America, or what you call the major trading nations like US and UAE, has marginally gone down. And what we see is there is an increase in exports to China, Hong Kong and Singapore. And Hong Kong and Singapore, these two countries are in the top 10 destinations. So it is a good sign, and there is a diversification taking place. And during these uncertain times, we are all talking about diversification of Indian exports, not to depend only on. And another thing, we also see that surfaced import growth from Switzerland, particularly gold, medical and scientific instruments, that is by 48%. Then we analyze in details about India's trade concentration with its leading destinations, basically top 10 trading partners, both in exports as well as imports over the last 2 years. What we find is the share of top 10 leading destinations fell, both for exports as well as imports. We are observing that there is quite a bit of diversification taking place in the last 2 years. For example, when it comes to exports, actually it has gone down from 53% to 50%. And import destinations, top 10 imports destinations, the share of these top 10, the sourcing destinations has come down from 61% to 55%. So that is a very positive sign. However, still the imports are much more concentrated compared to exports. For example, the top 10 markets, the top 10 export destinations, they have 50% share in India's total exports, whereas only 4 importing countries or the sourcing countries, they have 58%. So we are heavily dependent on certain sourcing countries. That is where actually, given these uncertainties and trade sometimes that is being used as a weapon, so we need to be careful about it. India's remained the world. This trade was quarterly. We focused quite a lot on services exports as we are doing well. You would find a lot of information in the trade was quarterly report, which will be uploaded very soon. Global services imports, what we see over 10 years, global services exports has doubled from 5.1 trillion to 9.6 trillion, little less than double, but India's exports almost actually tripled, close to triple actually, from 156 billion to 460 billion. That is because India's services exports is growing on an average at a rate of 10.3% compared to the global growth rate of services at 6.6%. India's, as we all know, India is doing quite well when it comes to IT and IT services, whose share in the world services exports has gone up from 9.5 to 14.9. All of you know that the digitally delivered services, and all of course, given that the broadband internet connections, it has really reached every part of the world. That is where it is getting reflected, that the share has gone up almost close to 15%, and we are doing much better in those. And another positive sign is here also, when it comes to the services exports, we are not as dependent on North America like US and Canada. Gradually we are moving to European countries, whose share in India's services exports has gone up from 25% to 33%. Then we come to the pharmaceutical trades, that is the thematic sector that we are covering in this. And here, when it comes to the pharmaceutical, the global demand for pharmaceutical products, the total market is $1.3 trillion in 2025. And when we talk about the pharmaceuticals, there's two components. One is pharma, another is API. It's comprising The pharmaceuticals has a market of 1 trillion, whereas API is 261 billion. And when it comes to the pharmaceutical products, it is concentrated on two products. One is the formulated drugs, that is the code HS3004, having a market value of 571 billion, and its share in the total pharmaceutical imports of the world is 55%. The second biggest component is biopharma, which includes blood products, vaccines, and immunologicals, that is HS3002, having the market share of 391 billion and 38% in the pharmaceutical total imports. And who are the leading exporters? The Germany and Switzerland are the leading exporters. When it comes to API, 3/4 of the demand in API is concentrated in hormones and analogs, each having what you call 97 billion, and here are the top exporters. Ireland, Switzerland, China are the top global exporters. Then we analyze in details India's profile actually when it comes to the pharmaceuticals and API, and here we find pharmaceutical segments, India has a share of some value of 25.8 billion, and mostly formulated drugs, that is 22 billion out of 25.8 billion. And overall in the pharma we have a share of 2.5 of lower level. In details we analyze, we do very well when it comes to actually the volume, but some numbers I'll give you. But when it comes to value, though actually we are doing quite well in the pharmaceutical, the share is still low at 2.5%. In case of API, the total exports from India is 10 billion only out of 261 billion. So having a share of 3.8%, and it is also mostly dominated by nitrogen heterocyclic compounds, and some of the niche compounds I'll give you details little later. Then we look at the long-term trend, what is happening to the pharmaceutical imports. Between 2015 to 2025, India strengthened its positions in formulated drugs, the generic drugs that India is known for, with the export share rising from 3.2 to 4%. But when it comes to the biopharma, which is kind of capital intensive, R&D intensive, and it takes a lot more time there, and this is the component which is increasing much faster. India's export share in blood products, vaccine and immunological, the fastest growing segment globally, like it has increased the share from 24% to 38% between 2015 to 2025, from 122 billion to 390 billion, has remained 0.6%. It was 0.6% then in 2015 and the same in 2025. India mostly produces primarily low-cost conventional vaccines like DPT, BCG, rather than higher value patented therapies. Then again we look at the API, what are the compounds like this nitrogen heterocyclic compounds. Here substantial increase in some of the chemical components where India has done well, and that is the one section in the API segment we are doing well. We are getting almost 4.3 billion out of 10 billion in this particular component. But there is another component, what I call bigger segment in the API, that is in hormones and analogs. India's share has declined, and that is one of the fastest growing again. And it has a market value in the world close to 97 billion. There the share of India has really gone down from 1.8% to 0.3% over this last 10 years. India is a major supplier of affordable generic drugs. As I was mentioning, that India is doing very well when it comes to the volume generic drugs, but in terms of value, we don't get much. For example, we are meeting, in terms of volume, 50% of Africa's prescribed drugs, 40% of US's prescribed drugs, and 25% Asia. That's it. India is basically the hub of generic drugs, providing some kind of health security in these countries. Developing markets, it has a market 159 billion, and here developing markets, we are looking at the top 10 developing countries, China, Brazil, Russia, South Africa, like Mexico. So in this top 10, the total market or the total import all by these top 10 developing countries is close to 160 billion, and it has a share of 16% in the world demand. And there we are exporting close to 10 billion, that is 6.1%. Yeah, we are doing marginally better over last 10 years, increasing share from 5.8 to 6.1, but I feel there is huge opportunity given that India is doing so well in some of the segments that these countries demand. One of the good signs we observe here in this pharmaceutical also, the patent filing in India's life sciences rose 8-fold in the last 10 years, that's like 10 to 12 years. 440 in 2013 to 3,576 in 2023. It is a sign of the innovation-led, what you call story in this segment, placing it among the world's top 10 patent filers in medical technology, biotechnology, and pharmaceuticals. We also looked at that what are the things really come on the way of India's pharmaceutical exports, and we see that non-tariff barriers both by developed countries and non-developed countries, developing countries. Here the SPS measures the TBT, technical barriers to trade, phytosanitary measures, licensing and quality control requirements amount for about 95% of non-tariff measures faced by Indian pharmaceutical exports in developed countries, and it is 80% in developing countries. So non-tariff barriers are the main reasons why we are not able to do so well or much better than what we can do given our capabilities. Now I'm not going through all these charts and tables we have done, because more or less the key highlights I've already mentioned. So it's available to all of you. You can always look at the numbers. Here is the composition of exports and imports. This merchandise exports, the directions, basically the top destinations for both exports and also sourcing countries. Here, as I was talking about the concentrations, and both the concentration of exports and imports are going down, but still the concentration of the imports is much higher. And if the services exports performance, you see that India is doing well in business services. Basically, they are the GCC, and one is ITS, which share has gone up in the world services exports, and we are also doing well. Then pharmaceuticals. Here, this is the pharma section, the pharmaceuticals, where the total trade available is what you call the total world import is close to 1 billion, and the first component, that is the formulated drugs, whose share is 55%. We are getting 22.6 billion out of 25.8 billion total pharmaceutical exports in this segment. The next is the active pharmaceutical ingredients, that is API, whose market is 261 billion, and we are getting around 10 billion. And if you look at the main products coming under the API, it is the nitrogen heterocyclic compounds, where we are getting 4.3 billion out of 10 billion, and that is, and all other segments we are not doing that well, but overall we are doing better when it comes to the API, having 3.8% share compared to 2.5% in a pharmaceutical. And here the global demand, see what you can find out is how that's dynamically the pharmaceutical sectors is changing. Like the biopharma is the one which has increased almost like fourfold in the last 10 years. There we are not doing well, having just 0.6% share. And here is the developing countries, the top 10 developing countries. We are exporting 9.7, close to $10 billion out of $160 billion market that is available. I think we can do much better. Now this is the main segment, pharmaceutical industry insights. For every trade watch quarterly, we have a stakeholders meeting where we call the firms who are involved in this business, the exporters and importers. Because it's a big story, we have more than half a day discussions with them with particular questions. So let me just carefully go through it. The first is limited presence in high-value pharmaceutical segments, such as biologics, biosimilars, advanced therapies, hormones, and analogs. While the high capital requirements of the manufacturing continue to constrain long-term investment and scale-up, and here the R&D expenditure is also quite high and it's time consuming. Weak innovation and commercialization ecosystem. Constrained by low R&D intensity. On an average in India, we spend something like 7% of the net sales, where the global average is 15 to 20%. Weak industry academic collaborations, we have R&D labs in the private sector, in the government sector, and also the sectors were supported by the government but autonomous. So we are scattered and we are not able to get the synergy. Inadequate technology transfer mechanism and delays in patent grants that create uncertainty for innovators and long-term investment. Basically, we need to improve the IPR ecosystem. Government has done quite a lot, but still I think we need to do much more. If we look at the number of patients, number of patent officers available for millions of populations, actually in a normalized way, we will be one of the lowest. And of course, the R&D expenditure, I think we are not doing great. It's only 0.7%. Compared to like 2.5% in China, 4.5% in Russia. So I think that is the macro picture. Anyway, trade and market access constraints, high non-tariff barriers, including lengthy product registration process, duplicative inspections, documentation requirements, limited reliance on approvals from stringent regulators, while existing FDAs often lack enforceable pharmaceutical specific provisions to effectively address these regulatory barriers. That is one of the things which are highlighted. We got it from the literature and also from the stakeholders meeting. Supply chain and sustainability challenges, because this pharma, basically they use lot of chemicals. That is where the sustainability issues, the compliance cost is very high. India's pharmaceutical supply chain remains heavily dependent on Chinese, almost 65% we depend on them for critical APIs, KSMs and intermediaries, particularly fermentation-based products, while rising environmental compliance requirements, including JLD, that's zero liquid discharge, and effluent treatment obligations, have significantly increasing manufacturing and R&D costs, which come on the way of India's pharma sector doing well in API. Now the last couple of slides, that's a way forward. In fact, actually when we are working, we are all thinking about how to make the actionable points with this favorite of our Honorable VC. In fact, whenever I tell my team now focus on actionable points, actually their faces become non-actionable. Anyway, we were trying our best actually to bring out what we got from stakeholders meeting, promote diversification into high pharmaceutical segments, build on the mission Biopharma Shakti. We have already announced that through a long-term policy framework to support investment, technology development and manufacturing scale-up in biologic, biosimilars and advanced therapeutics. That is the market we need to look at. Enhancing regulatory transparency and access to information, mandate accessible records for non-commercial regulatory information required for CTS CO, that is the organization sector, and state and UT FDAs for the effective monitoring for completing applications and enable timely legal process, of course. Because the whole process in pharma and also API is time consuming. We need to really improve overall regulatory and institutional setup. Time-bound patent opposition and grant process. So whenever you go for a patent, there is a time given for the oppositions that it needs to be kind of timely. Restrict pre-grant oppositions to a defined period, 6 to 12 months from publication. Prescribe clear timeline for admissibility decisions and also dispositions of oppositions. Stronger industry, academia, technology transfer. All of a sudden, it's impossible for the farm or the country to increase the R&D. It's better to bring the really scale up by bringing synergy. That is, having academia, industry, collaboration. Establishing technology transfer offices, industry-funded research centers, joint IP development frameworks, and life sciences clusters to accelerate patent commercialization, research collaboration, and startup incubation. So last slide, address non-tariff barriers and strengthen regulatory cooperation for trade agreements, which is essential. India may prioritize pharmaceutical specific regulatory cooperation and trade negotiations, streamline product registration process, faster approval timelines, and greater transparency in procurement process. These are actually very specific steps and we need to focus. And also we need to develop a model pharmaceutical chapter for FDA negotiations. A standardized pharmaceutical chapter that may serve as a template across FDA negotiations that may be drafted to ensure greater consistency in negotiation. It's basically acceptability of standard certification, everything by both the trading partners. So we can have a specific chapter in every FTA for pharmaceutical. Promote sustainable and environmental compliant manufacturing, strengthen domestic API manufacturing through green technologies and resource efficient production while developing common effluent treatment, including zero liquid discharge. The last sections, this is more of information. Every time we bring out what are the developments that are taking place in the world that may likely affect India's trade. For example, US courts that has torn down the 10% tariffs on certain provisions, establishment of US-China Board of Trade and Investment, 14th Ministerial Conference by WTO. You need to really go through, and there actually we are just giving some possible, likely scenario that how it is going to kind of make a difference to India's trade. When it comes to the India's trade policy, it's we have signed India-New Zealand FTA. There it has been covered. India-South Africa bilateral cooperations, export relief package. And as all of you know, we also track the commodity prices, and we have given the latest commodity prices. So, yeah, I will stop here, and thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for the insightful overview of the public meeting. Next, we are now honored to have with us today Honorable Vice Chairman NITI Aayog, Shri Ashok Nidhi. I request sir to kindly release the billboard for the publication for Q4 FY 2025-26. Thank you very much, sir, for releasing the publication. I now invite Honorable VC NITI Aayog to deliver his address.
Good afternoon. After Dr. Prabhakar Sahu, my colleague, has given this presentation, there is not much to say, except that we shouldn't be saying that goods we are not doing well, but services are doing very well. Services are doing very well, very good, thank you. The question is, why aren't we doing better in goods? And what he has done, he has focused on pharmaceuticals. Now, pharmaceuticals, you have heard that we used to feel very happy that India has become the pharmacy of the world. But what Prabhakar showed us, yes, in low value pharmaceutical products we are doing very well. In terms of quantity also we are doing very well. But we need to move up the value chain, and we need to produce much more value, precious things, because that is where money comes. Now, my colleagues were under pressure. They got the numbers, they've analyzed it and given it. I hope the academics, the policy makers in the government, they'll focus on it and try to find out ways in which we can do better. And Prabhakar has also given some indications that needs to be analyzed, and you are the journalists, you will also give us some inputs. I have nothing more to add, but to say that despite the Hormuz crisis, despite the commodity price shocks, we have held our head high, but we need to do much better. Thank you very much. Are you going to take any questions or no? I think if there are no questions that need to be answered now and here, we can end the meeting here. Thank you very much. By the way, I think Nidhi, this is the first press conference that I'm meeting where I'm exposing myself to all these dangerous journalists. Thank you very much.
Suppose you will take 2%.
Huh?
Not now, actually, maybe I think we'll have a discussion later.
Thank you,
Have a
sir, for your
discussion.
insightful remark and pertinent guidance. May I now request Ms. Selina Sophia to kindly deliver the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my privilege to propose vote of thanks for the release event of this Trade Watch Quarterly for the last quarter of 25-26 in the presence of your August gathering. On behalf of the Economics and Finance One vertical, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to everyone present here. My sincere thanks to everyone who contributed to this edition, seeing the light of the day. Trade Watch Quarterly brings out the analysis of India's performance in global trade and geopolitical impact on trade. This edition included a brief a bird's eye view of India's pharmaceutical sector in the international market. I am glad to be part of this team that brings out this publication. A heartfelt thanks to our Honorable Vice Chairman Shri Ashok Kumar Lahiri for his guidance and support in publishing this edition. Our special thanks to our CEO Ms. Nidhi Chhibber for her guidance and support to bring out this edition. Our sincere thanks to all program directors and senior officers for raising this event. Our sincere thanks to the Indian Drug Manufacturers Association, sector-specific stakeholders, industry stakeholders for their inputs. Our sincere thanks to our advisory board members for their time and inputs. My sincere thanks to our senior lead, Shri Prabhakar Sahu, for his immense contribution in conceptualizing and bringing out this edition. My earnest appreciation to our team members who work tirelessly in making this edition better every day. Tons of appreciation to all the team members in participation in the team efforts. My sincere recognition to the Maps and Charts Division for designing this edition incredibly vibrant. Finally, my special thanks to media personnel, print, digital and broadcast for accepting our invitation and making this event a grand success. Eventually, you disseminate this information for wider public reach, and we expect your cooperation and support as always. Thanks one and all.
Services we have done well. The issue is not that we shouldn't be saying that goods we are not doing well, but services are doing very well. Services are doing very well, very good. Thank you. The question is why